Michael J. Fox and Nancy McKeon lead a cast of thousands in a story of teen romance, school politics, and class warfare that could only be called High School U.S.A., plus a robot. Battle of the Network shows. Join Rick Brooks and Mike Kogel as they explore the TV of the 70s and 80s through hand-picked episodes of their favorite and not-so-favorite series.
Welcome to Battle of the Network shows USA. I'm Mike.
And I'm Rick. Hello, everyone.
And today we're going to be doing this season's listener poll episode based on a poll we gave. We listed some choices, and our listeners at our Facebook group decided we should do this particular TV movie in this case.
And may I commend the listeners, because once again, the people have spoken and the people have chosen an outstanding selection. I think the people nailed it on this one. I think they picked the right one.
I think they picked the one we were rooting for, didn't they?
Well, yes, I might have been leaning towards this one for various reasons, accessibility being one of them. But yeah, I was glad to see the result. Of course, we tried to maintain the integrity of the process. We did not influence the voting in any way, I think.
Correct.
But yeah, it was our sort of informal but fairly consistent TV movie slot we have going right now, Mike. And we wanted to do a high school related TV movie this time. And there were 4 choices in chronological order. They were Senior Trip from 1981 with Scott Baio and Mickey Rooney and also Faye Grant. And High School U.S.A. from 1983 with a cast of dozens. And then a pair from 1988, Crash Course with Alyssa Milano, Jack A., Harvey Korman, and Charlie Robinson. And Dance Till Dawn, also from 1988, also with Alyssa Milano, or do I have that wrong in the poll?
No, I think that's right. Wow.
Kelsey Grammer, Tracy Gold, and Christina Applegate as well. So, and High School USA was the overwhelming winner, and I can understand why. Has a lot to offer.
Well, I was slightly rooting against Crash Course only because I've seen it a couple times, and it's not very good. But it is a prime example of this kind of movie. Although I think maybe this one is even more so, where it seems to be a bunch of people from a bunch of teen stars in particular from a particular network.
Right.
Although I think Crash Course mixes networks, so I don't think that's quite the case there, but you still get that feeling you're seeing people you're already familiar with in a different context.
I think by 1988, it was partly the advent of an upstart network. The Fox network was coming in, boundaries were going down. A little thing called Crisis on Infinite Earths had proved to wreak havoc on the notion of, set universes and encouraged intermingling. And I think that had an effect on TV movies as well. So 1983 was a little bit more of an innocent time, that the boundaries were up, the wall was still up, if you will, and things were a little bit more rigid.
And yet, as I learned from You Must Remember This, and an episode that one of our Facebook group members recommended, 1982 was sort of the year of the teen sex comedy with Porky's and Fast Times and American Version. So you could say it's possible this movie was trying to capitalize on that without being particularly about sex.
Yes, well, that's one of the things that amuses me. It's sort of like a hard PG effort to replicate the antics of that wave of R-rated movies. It tries to capture that vibe, and it does so like in some really weird ways sometimes. But it does things that are always acceptable by 1983 broadcast television standards. Even NBC. Yes, NBC in 1983 had standards. And they had to live up to them, and they did, but that's what makes this movie, one of the things that makes this movie interesting is the effort to combine so many things, to promote stars from different shows and promote the network, to capture like a youth vibe, and also to capture the R-rated sex comedy vibe that was so big at the time.
And 50s and 60s nostalgia.
Yes, that's one of the most bizarre things about this movie is the attempt to get some of that American Graffiti vibe, a movie that came out like a decade earlier.
Right.
Although I guess Porky's was a period piece too.
Yeah. And Grease.
Yes. No, but something like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, a movie I love, that was very much of its time and very much of early 80s. And other than a few stylistic touches, I'd say High School USA is also of its time. Or maybe it's more fair to say of what TV and movies thought the time was like.
Yeah.
it checks off a lot of the things in the early 80s checklist, and I like it, actually. That's one of the reasons I enjoyed watching this, is because it gets so many of those 80s touchstones in it.
Yeah, but it didn't seem totally phony to me. But that might be because of some of the grounded performances, like Crispin Glover.
Ah, yes.
When you have Michael J. Fox and Nancy McKeon, you got pretty solid leads there.
Yes.
So it looks 80s, but it doesn't like obnoxiously look 80s. There's not like valley speak or anything like that.
I think probably the most blatantly cliche 80s pop culture part of it is the whole misfits versus preppies war that is, kind of the central focus of the movie. But other than that, like the details, you're right. I mean, there's like an arcade scene, there's a roller rink scene, roller skating rink. And, those things were big in the 80s. So, I got no problem with them being featured.
Fast food was big in the 80s, right?
Sure, yeah.
Fall dances.
That's right. When Lori and I were watching this, we were kind of joking, like, boy, this movie, it so hits home because we recognize so many of these characters, Didn't we all have a Leo Bandini in our... school? Didn't we all have a Bo Middleton? And, we didn't. I mean, they're types, but...
Yeah, didn't we all have a Dirty Kurt? The guy with... the married guy with a child and another one on the way.
Yeah, now, I will give the movie credit because they establish early on that he's old. They show him shaving in a,
Yes.
locker room scene.
And he says in that scene, I have kids.
Yes, and what I liked, and it pays off because later you actually see his kid.
Yeah.
Which I thought was pretty cool. Like, I'd almost forgotten, about that little touch. I wouldn't have expected to actually see the kid, but they bring the kid over, and it's funny. I think overall, I certainly wouldn't call it a great movie, but it's an interesting mix of things that fall flat, things that are dated, yes, but also some interesting time capsule qualities and some things that are genuinely, pretty entertaining and amusing.
And I think it shares with Fast Times some structural things. I mean, it seems like for a lot of it that it's really just a bunch of vignettes almost, because there are like tons of scenes. But then it actually, they kind of tie everything together. Maybe not in like quite a neat a bow as like Seinfeld or The Wire or something, but all these sort of disparate things do end up kind of dovetailing.
It's funny you mentioned The Wire because I do think season 4 of The Wire was heavily influenced by the sense of despair among the students and even the faculty. Mr. Sirota's hapless, the hapless shop teacher who hates his job. I think that had a big influence on David Simon's 4th season of The Wire.
Oh, sure.
You're right, though, Mike, except there is one thing, one of the central themes that they try to do in the movie that I think they tie up too neatly that doesn't work. And you could probably guess what I'm thinking of, maybe.
The butt shot?
No. No. The fact that, okay, so
I'm going to get JJ finding purpose?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just ridiculous throughout the whole movie. It was, kind of an attempt to give some kind of central drive or motivation for the character. And they do wrap that one up too neatly. That part's laughable. I mean, it really is. And even, just the way they show the character, like, working it out. And I think he even says that to, Nancy McKeon at one point. I'm trying to find, something that I can commit to and follow through, on.
Not a relationship with you, but
yeah,
winning a ridiculous auto race.
Right. In the span of, I don't know, this all the events in this take place in, like, what, a week maybe?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe 2, but it seems like about a week near the beginning of the school year. I think it's just because he's spelling it out, and the principal has already spelled it out for him too, that he's sort of aimless. And they do, give him some background that I think is interesting. They don't touch on it enough, but that he's sort of raising himself most of the time.
Right.
And so it's hard for him, I guess, to be too enthusiastic about things. I mean, his mom abandoned them. He was 2, and his dad is always off, I guess, for work, is out of town a lot.
Yeah, and one thing that they do that kind of supports the central premise is they do have his character become a leader, and he organizes the misfits, gives them like a motivational speech, and gives them a purpose, which kind of reaffirms what he's doing and everything out there. So it's to me it was a little bit laughable the way they spelled all that out, but I give them credit for trying. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on, like you say. There's a lot of like things that are almost like vignettes. They have tons of characters, and they've got like an hour and 40 minutes to do it all in, and some of it works, some of it doesn't. But it's an interesting effort.
So let's talk about some of the cast. We already mentioned Michael J. Fox and Nancy McKeon, of course, stars at the time of Family Ties and The Facts of Life on NBC. And then I guess I thought it was interesting. I don't when did Revenge of the Nerds come out?
Ooh, I'm thinking 84 would be my guess.
Okay.
I think it would be after this.
Yeah, Anthony Edwards is the preppy villain.
Yes.
And of course, in Revenge of the Nerds, he's one of the nerds.
Right.
And it seems like he can do both. He's pretty good as a preppy villain. He has a good coldness about him.
Yes.
That, sometimes he would utilize on ER even though he was the good doctor. But, I seem to remember him being, kind of a jerk sometimes.
Yeah, he's very smarmy in this, but it is kind of funny seeing him because he's it's not just the preppy nature of it, but the notion of him being the big man on campus, the king, the most popular kid in school, regardless of the reason. That's pretty funny after seeing, what happened to his career after that. So that's a little amusing. But yeah, he's easy to dislike in this role.
Yes. There's also Todd Bridges as Michael J. Fox's best friend and Proto Urkel.
Yeah, he's an electronic genius and I guess an all-around genius, really.
Yeah, he's not really very Urkel-like other than making a robot and being black and wearing bow ties. But other than that... And Dana Plato is also in it, although her role is pretty minor, I think.
Yeah, and speaking of minor, her big character trait seems to be dating grown men.
That is weird.
She dates a dentist early on. She makes a reference to that, and I was thinking, wait a minute, does she actually mean a dentist or somebody who wants to be a dentist? And no, it's actually a dentist.
Yeah, and then later she's with like an Air Force officer.
Yeah, it's like Gerald McRaney at the end, and it's... I don't know. It's just kind of a weird thing that they have a character sort of make fun of her for it at the end, but they don't really dive deeply into that. But there's some kind of issue with her, but she's shallow too, I guess, is the thing.
Yeah, and she does want to, she makes some comment about some other thing being, childish.
Yeah, right.
Maybe
she
cheerleading or something. And
aspires to be older than she is.
Yeah.
And she's fine in that role. I just, Todd Bridges, I just want to add, though, he's very likable in this. There's just something about him. He's pretty charming. He's kind of laid back. He doesn't seem to be trying too hard. And I actually, really believed him in this, which is funny because, at the time, this is a pretty big departure for him, playing this kind of a totally different character from, Willis Jackson. And I think he was one of the highlights of the movie. I thought he was really good.
And he and Michael J. Fox seem to have a good chemistry, like his pals. Yeah. And not on an NBC sitcom at the time, as far as I know, Crystal Bernard, later of Wings fame, plays another shallow, preppy girl who's infatuated with Anthony Edwards' beau and very conniving. And then there are, as we mentioned, Crispin Glover as sort of very socially awkward, creepy dude.
Yeah, spoiler alert, Crispin Glover plays somebody who's eccentric.
Yes.
It's going to shock you out there, folks.
Right, and in another precursor to things to come, Michael J. Fox kind of saves his bacon.
That's right.
And looks out for him. And I don't know, I don't remember the actor's name who plays his buddy, Chucky.
The great Michael Zorek. As I believe I referred to him as such when I wrote the poll. He was in, it's funny, Mike, because I would have thought that he was in like tons of these kind of movies, but really he wasn't. He just seemed like he was, but he was in Private School, which had a great theme song, which I'm not going to, which actually had the words Private School as the main part of the song, which was good, but with Phoebe Cates and Matthew Modine, but more importantly, Phoebe Cates. So Phoebe Cates was not just in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, but she was in Private School, which was, a far more risque and not quite as insightful teen sex comedy of the time. But it has a very distinctive look to him.
And then there are a lot of other outcasts and people, but the adults that populate the movie are mostly from 50s and 60s TV, like former teen stars. And so most prominent is Dobie Gillis, whose name I'm forgetting.
Dwayne Hickman,
yes, as Mr. Plaza, the biology teacher. And Tony Dow from Leave It to Beaver as Mr. Kinney, the principal. And Bob Denver as Crispin Glover's dad, and who else?
Well, Nancy McKeon, Beth, her parents are played by Eleanor Donahue and Ken Osmond from Leave It to Beaver, and they essentially get one scene, but it's a funny one because Anthony Edwards essentially does to Ken Osmond what Ken Osmond did to Barbara Billingsley and Hugh Beaumont back on Leave It to Beaver.
Hugh Downs, I just said Hugh Downs. Hugh Downs telling the beaver he needs to eat more eggs.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's also a cameo by Lumpy from Leave It to Beaver.
Yes.
Who runs a catering business.
Yeah, Frank Bank. I don't even know if he gets any dialogue. Maybe one line of dialogue, maybe?
I think, yeah, when Bo is wanting to fire Otto for letting the creepy nerds get into the party.
Yes.
Or letting JJ get in there actually. David Nelson makes a cameo as a janitor.
Yeah, it was kind of odd to see David Nelson, from Ozzie and Harriet, Ozzie Nelson's real life son. But I was kind of thinking that one of the only things that this movie was missing was a real psychotic janitor character or somebody disturbed. Like I was thinking, like the janitor should have been like he only gets one scene in this movie too. But I was thinking the janitor would be somebody who was like sort of deranged, like almost like a troubled Vietnam veteran or somebody, or somebody who just muttered to himself under his breath and, was unintelligible to most everybody else. And David Nelson, he's actually pretty straightforward as the janitor.
Yeah, I do have a lot of questions about that janitor's closet, though. Well, I have one question. Why is there a bed in there?
Yes. There's probably a 3-hour cut of this movie that gets into a lot of these backstories more.
Yeah, David Nelson probably was really disappointed when he watched it.
Yeah.
he had done 10 scenes. It was only in one.
Yes. That's why he was disappointed when he watched it.
Yeah.
Because his part was reduced.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but on Ozzie and Harriet, like his character was sort of the beaver of that show, right?
He was actually he was the older brother.
Oh, he was the older brother.
Yeah. Rick Nelson, Ricky was the younger one.
Okay.
Yeah, so David was pretty sensible.
Yeah, okay. I had my Nelsons confused.
Yes.
Much like I get Gunner and
Matthew.
The other one.
Yeah.
Confused.
Well, inexperienced, Nelsonaholics, they make that mistake. So you'll get there, Mike. You'll get there.
Right. Yeah, is there anyone else? We didn't mention Miss D'Angelo.
Oh, yes. Miss D'Angelo, who's kind of like the love interest of Dwayne Hickman's character. She's also she's the coach of the cheerleading team, and she's a teacher. I can't remember what she teaches.
Yeah, I don't know what she teaches.
But yeah, she's played by Angela Cartwright, who was on Lost in Space.
And Dawn Wells is the home ec teacher.
Yes.
A very Southern home ec teacher.
Yes, a Southern Belle, I guess. And who else? I guess we should mention Barry Livingston as the shop teacher. Not quite recognizable to those who remember him from Ernie on My Three Sons.
No.
He looks quite different in this role, but he actually makes an impact in his several scenes. Gets a few gags.
Yeah, he looks more like the burnout character you're imagining.
Yes. And I also want to mention Steve Franken, who was also on Dobie Gillis. There's a wacky, probable former Nazi teacher in this, who's kind of the main teacher we see as far as like in classroom settings in this, and he's a blind German who has a vicious dog and a thick accent. And Steve Franken was kind of, I always found him a more kind of a distinctive actor. I always kind of enjoyed seeing him in things, but he was Chatsworth Osborne, I think was his name on Dobie Gillis, a role that was essentially Warren Beatty did that role at first on the early episodes, and then Steve Franken kind of took in, it was kind of like the rich snobbish character, kind of a foil for Dobie. And I thought the character was totally ridiculous in this, but I like seeing Steve Franken. I would have liked to have seen him doing some more Steve Franken stuff and not this particular role, but it was just kind of bizarre, really.
Yeah, it was sort of a little bit like Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah, that's a good call.
So, yeah, I didn't realize he was from Dobie Gillis.
Yes, that was a nice little touch. How about Tom Villard as Leo Bandini? He was on a sitcom We Got It Made with Terry Copley on NBC. Around this time, and died young. I think he was like 40 when he died, but he had kind of an offbeat look to him, and often, I think played kind of like spaced out characters like this one is. And Kathy Silvers, Jenny Piccolo, and Laurie Hendler from Gimme a Break play sort of a pair of like sort of misfit, and as Laurie called them, sex pests in a way in this movie. It's sort of like gender swaps, sort of the sex pests in a way, because they have a certain goal to get a photograph of Bo Middleton's butt throughout the whole series or throughout the whole movie. And so those two, they're maybe the most disjointed from some of the main plot lines.
Yeah, and I don't want to spread rumors around the high school, but is it possible there was more going on between them than the movie could say? There was one line where one of them said something about, I don't want people to talk. Like they were going to go to a party together, do something together.
I would say no, and here's why. Because I think they explicitly address that in the scene where they're at the high school carnival, which, of course, all high schools in the 80s and for years had big carnivals, right after the beginning of school, of course.
They needed chaperones.
Yes, yeah, huge sprawling affairs that everybody went to. But there's like did they call it the Hall of Fun? The fun house, okay. And, to have fun in the fun house. And they're going in together, and they actually sort of, to me, the fact that they explicitly address that says to me like this is the movie telling you that you're not supposed to think that that's
Okay. Yeah, that's
the case.
That's right. Because one of them didn't want to go in together because it would look like something.
And it was kind of an odd thing because Bo Middleton, he tells Beth, Nancy McKeon, that they're going to have fun in the fun house. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of odd that this ride, like everybody at this high school carnival assumes this particular exhibit, it has that one purpose. And the logistics of the exhibit, the attraction, it doesn't seem to lend itself to too much of that, except that it's a dark space. I mean, it's not that big. I'm not sure how much opportunity for movement there is in that. The whole scene's a little bizarre.
Yeah, people get confused about who's who because the wrong person gets pantsed. And...
Yes, Michael Zorik's butt is one of the stars of the movie.
Yes. We don't see it, of course.
No, we see it in boxers. Any butt shot in the movie is somebody in boxers.
Right.
Which is humiliating enough, apparently. On broadcast television, that's humiliation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that implies nudity.
Yes.
If you remember from Dukes of Hazzard. They would go skinny dipping in boxer shorts.
Yes, good point.
Anyway, so before we get into it a little bit, into the movie more, do you have any information about when it aired, what it aired against, what it aired with?
Yes, I do. I have all that. And I don't find a whole lot of in-depth material on this movie on the internet or anywhere else, actually. But I did see, like, on the TV Tropes website, an interesting original display ad. I must have been from a TV guide for the movie. And I will put this in the show notes so all of us can enjoy it. But the ad has at the top, voted most hilarious. Okay, and, it's at the bottom, it's Be There. This is the early days of the NBC, Be There campaign. World premiere movie, 9 p.m., okay? But what's interesting is it's almost like you're opening up a yearbook. So it says it's the teachers versus the students. And then under the teachers, on the teacher's side, on the left of the page, it has 4 headshots, like in a yearbook, of some of the grown-ups. And it has, what movie or what TV show they're from underneath it. And then on the student side, it has the same. Now, the movie, of course, is not at all the teachers versus the students. I mean, except maybe Michael J. Fox against, the Steve Franken Nazi character. But on the teacher's side, Mike, it has Bob Denver, Dwayne Hickman, Tony Dow, and Eleanor Donahue. And one of them's a teacher, one of them's a principal, but the other 2 are parents. They're not even teachers, which is kind of weird.
And did they list Bob Denver as being from Dobie Gillis or Gilligan's Island?
Dobie Gillis.
Uh-huh. Or, I should have said, or the For Out Space Notes.
Yes. And the student side has Michael J. Fox, actually just Michael Fox in this ad, notably. Nancy McKeon, Dana Plato, and Todd Bridges. Now, of course, the main thing is it's actually the Misfits versus the Preppies, but this kind of shows to you, and they say, all-star cast, all-out fun. And it's got some Jack Davis-ish type illustrations at the bottom, which are not Jack Davis, but I think it's kind of an effort to kind of do that. But clearly they were trying to market it to everybody, not just teenagers, and by putting like who they thought were the most marketable grown-ups in, I guess they thought they could bring in a larger crowd on this, which premiered on a Sunday night. So they were going for like a general audience. Despite the 9 p.m. time, I guess they hoped to get the younger set in there as well. But it's an interesting ad. It was actually October 16th, 1983 when the movie premiered. And so it's at 7 o'clock that night. CBS had 60 Minutes. NBC had First Camera, which is an odd name, but it was a news magazine type show, I believe. So, there's a great idea, right? Put up a news magazine or public affairs show against 60 Minutes, in 1983. And ABC had Ripley's Believe It or Not.
Not.
Yes. And 8 p.m., this is kind of quite a war here, Mike. CBS had Alice in One Day at a Time. NBC had Knight Rider. And ABC had Hardcastle on McCormick, and we've done all these shows on the podcast except One Day at a Time, which maybe we'll get to that someday. And then at 9 p.m., so NBC had High School U.S.A., CBS had The Jeffersons, and ABC had Nighthawks from 1981 with Sylvester Stallone and Billy D. Williams. So that's kind of a stark difference in movies, isn't it? Nighthawks and High School USA.
Yeah, I was just checking out that ad while you were talking. It is a impressive bit of TV Guide advertising there. Voted most hilarious by who?
Well, it wasn't our Facebook group because that was 2 years ago. But somebody, I guess.
Yeah, and there it doesn't say but who. World premiere movie, all-star cast, all-out fun. You already said that one. It looks like there's somebody on a motorcycle, which I don't remember any motorcycles, but cheerleaders and
all kinds of wacky stuff. And just for completeness, I'll mention that Goodnight Beantown followed The Jeffersons on CBS and Trapper John MD. And, maybe this would be a good time to mention, Mike, that the director, Rod Amato, he was also directed many of the episodes of the original Dobie Gillis and was a producer on that show as well. And he also was involved with Burns and Allen's show. And the man has a very interesting resume because in addition to those, acclaimed popular programs, he was also partly responsible for My Mother the Car, and he directed the Garbage Pail Kids movie in 1987.
Right, I saw that one listed. Yeah, which is what little I've seen of it is terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, that's considered a terrible movie. And also, he was a producer on Super Train, too, several years earlier on NBC.
Right, and the little bit of information I saw about this is that it was successful enough that then NBC made a pilot based on it, but it didn't go anywhere, didn't go to series.
Yes, and I have not seen this yet, but I intend to. It's available on YouTube pretty easily, and I'll put this in the playlist and link to it in the show notes. But yeah, I'm curious to check that out.
Okay.
I'll do some digging and see if I can find some more details for the show notes.
So we were talking before we started recording, because this has so much going on, so many scenes and gags and things, we decided to kind of do more of an overview look than, a scene by scene. And we'll try to highlight some scenes, I think, and bits that we like or bits that are maybe not so good. So I thought we maybe start with talking about some of the main storylines for some of the characters. So as you mentioned, Michael J. Fox, he has two motivations. One, the one we talked about, which is finding purpose in life. The other one is winning the heart of Beth, Nancy McKeon's Beth. So those are the big driving forces, and those lead to also taking down the preppy. Does that sound right to you?
Yes, and I will say that Nancy McKeon's Beth character is very underwritten. There's really not much to her, which makes it all the more laughable later when she kind of criticizes Bo for not getting her, or not caring or asking her about anything. She kind of makes it sound like, like I'm a person with, feelings and, ideas and motivations, but we don't really see a lot of that.
No, there's like the one scene where she and JJ are riding a Ferris wheel, kind of.
What I like to call the iconic Ferris wheel scene.
Yeah. And they have like a heart-to-heart, sort of. She's like, oh, here we are sharing each other's deepest secrets. They're not really.
No, they're not deep and they're not really secret. It's poorly written.
I mean, of course, Nancy McKeon brings something to the character, even though it's poorly written. And she just seems like she's a nice girl.
Yeah, I thought there was actually zero chemistry between these two. They're trying, and like there's from the moment, like early on at the beginning of the movie, he sort of runs into her and they bend down, picking up her books or whatever, and he just like calls her a knockout or whatever. And he seems very sincere about it, but I don't think there's anything between them, and the movie tries to generate it, but there's just not much there. I think it's a pretty weak part of the movie, actually.
And yet apparently they dated in real life.
Yeah. Well,
after making this, and they made another movie that I sort of vaguely remember called Poison Ivy. Not to be confused with the Drew Barrymore Poison Ivy.
Yes, or the Alyssa Milano Poison Ivy, which strangely did not come out in 1988, even though 23% of all movies in 1988 did star Alyssa Milano.
Right, but as far as Beth, I mean, I don't think she has a storyline per se, other than to be won by one of these guys.
Yeah, she wants to be popular. She wants to be somebody. She wants to be a contender. But we don't even really know how she and Bo got together. There's, again, some of the missing backstory. But they just are together.
Yeah, she went from being a zero to being part of the A crew.
Yeah, and the presumption is that the reason why Bo would choose her when he could have any woman at Excelsior High School is because she's Nancy McKeon.
Yeah.
That I think is the presumption, because they don't give any other reason, why he'd be interested in her.
Right. Maybe she was more difficult to convince. Like, clearly, Crystal Bernard's character, Anne Marie, she's right there for him, just waiting for him, and so he doesn't seem that interested.
That could be. And
I'm reading between the lines there, because there's never any reasoning given for him not being interested in her.
I do admire your continued efforts to dig for the subtext and the hidden messages in the movie.
Uh-huh.
This might be a good time to point out that Nancy McKeon and Crystal Bernard have spectacular 1983 hair in this movie.
They do, yes. And Crystal Bernard gets to wear a spectacular punk wig.
Yes.
So there's Otto, Todd Bridges, and his main thing is he's building this robot that he wants the space program to use. Because, of course, as TV proves again and again, people can just build robots.
Yes, and our space program was amazing how dependent it was on teenagers back in the 1980s.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess maybe something to do with budget cuts, or I don't know, but they really had to reach out to the youth of America for their research and development.
Well before Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, they were reaching out to the private sector. The garage inventors. The do-it-yourselfers. Yeah, and he's trying to get the heat shielding so it can survive like on Mars or something, or maybe Venus.
I'm going to bring it up, but just the mention of that causes some unfortunate connotations with, something that happened later in the 1980s that I don't want to get into. I thought about it and then kind of quickly dismissed it.
Yeah, that's good. But but that actually becomes him being able to keep the robot cool becomes an important plot point later.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff, they do build stuff that actually pays off later. And the robot is really cool. I love the robot.
He's voice activated. He's played by one of the Lollipop Guild.
Mm-hmm.
What's there not to like about the robot?
Well, there's one thing not to like about it. I was very disappointed that Otto did not name the robot. He just calls him Robot, which, I kind of like that in a way. I like, giving things, just addressing them by their, just generic names. However, I thought in this particular situation, the robot merited kind of a name, a wacky name of his own.
Yeah.
But I do like towards the end of the movie when sort of they're kind of in the stage where they have to work up a plan and they're kind of in trouble. There's a couple of shots where the robot is like kind of walks over to them and the robot is just standing around and it looks like the robot's like listening to them and not talking, but just like participating and being an active listener in the conversation, which I really got a kick out of.
It's excellent acting by that Lollipop Guild guy.
Yes, Jerry Marin, I believe.
And then Crispin Glover and as Archie and what's the guy's name again?
Michael Zorich.
Michael Zorich as Chucky. They're your typical mistress trying to get a little action.
Yes.
And then the two girls we were talking about, Nadine and Peggy, they join photography club run by Anne Marie because she bribed the teacher. And there's a fall project and the best nature photo will win the prize. So they decide to get a nature photo of Bo Middleton's butt.
Yeah, to get back, to get back at her. They have an explanation for that. I can't quite remember what it was, but it made sense to them. And of course, we all remember that the real action, all the real, the cool kids were all in the photography club back in the 80s.
Oh, yeah. This school seems oddly not invested in athletics in the way most high school movies would have a high school.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The big man on campus is, we see him throwing a football, but I don't get a sense that he's, on the football team or anything. And maybe his goons are.
Right. Yeah, Bo has a group of flunkies that hang around with him. And that football scene is really possibly only done just to kind of have a way for Bo to get kind of revenge on Michael J. Fox's character. But it is cool that in that scene, Anthony Edwards is wearing like an alligator shirt, for gym class or whatever while he's playing football.
Right, yeah. I couldn't, because of what he was wearing, I couldn't figure out, is this a gym class? Is this recess? Do they have recess at this high school? There are a lot of weird things they have at that high school, so I wouldn't put it past them, or maybe it's just a free time to run around, which is recess, basically. Yeah, that was weird. And then on the teacher side, Bo's dad, Bo Middleton Sr., has offered a $10,000 grant, which includes traveling to Europe, to the teacher who best exemplifies Excelsior High School's character, which of course is being judged by Bo Middleton Jr. And so Mr. Plaza in particular, but most of the teachers are spending a lot of time sucking up and conniving in order to get this. And then Mr. Plaza and Miss D'Angelo have a sort of secret relationship, although the other teachers know about it, but he wants to keep it more secret while he's trying to get this.
Yeah, this is one of the flimsiest storylines. It would have made more sense for her to be just annoyed at the fact that he's kissing up to Bo Middleton, which, is also a thing. But, there's a scene later where he takes her to a movie that he says is like 60 miles away and nobody will recognize them. But yet one person does. And then it turns out like, seemingly half the school is in that theater. So, yeah, that was just an awkward thing. It didn't work.
And the German guy, he's trying to. And Don Wells' character is a little bit. But so those are I would say, the major stories. And Bob Denver just bought a Trans Am.
Yes.
Which becomes important.
He's a supply salesman, and I guess he's successful at what he does, but he's a salesman. I forget what exactly it is. It's like a specific like restaurant supply or something like that. And, that's this is something else of the 1980s, drunk driving culture.
Oh, yes.
Which the movie gets into. And they kind of play it for laughs.
Uh-huh.
But he's not intentionally driving drunk, but...
No. In fact, he isn't driving drunk at all.
Right. A key part of the plot involves convincing him that he had been driving drunk and totaled his new car.
Yeah. So, right. Over the course of this, JJ and Beth become a little closer, and that angers Bo, and he's got it out for JJ, and various things happen. Mention the football, so the goons tackle JJ and rough him up and threaten him to stay away from Beth. And of course, right after that, he's in the cafeteria, and she takes care of his wounds in front of everybody. And later there's the home ec teacher, Don Wells, offers Bo to cook Bo a steak. And he says he likes steak raw, and the goons put it in JJ's backpack, and then the Dr. Hauptmann, the German guys, his dog chases JJ and drags Dr. Hauptmann around and, causes all sorts of chaos, and that's another flimsy one. Beth is like, how could you do that to a blind man? To JJ, and he can't even. But then later when he explains it, she's like, yeah, okay,
yeah. She calls it a cruel prank.
Right.
Like that's one heck of an elaborate cruel prank. And he even says, like, why would I, do this? And it makes no sense. But, she's upset. And of course, Dr. Hauptmann, in scenes where he needs to be, he's totally oblivious. And other scenes, despite being blind, he's totally aware of everything that's going on around him. Yeah.
So then that leads to, there's a scene where JJ's sitting in traffic in his old beat up car, and Bob Denver pulls up beside him in a Trans Am, and it's like, hey, you want to drag? And he zips away, and JJ's car doesn't go anywhere. But then there's it seems like 5 minutes of Michael J. Fox thinking. Yeah. It seems like he's looking at something, like he's doing some squinting and stuff, and I kept waiting for it to cut to what he was looking at, but then it didn't, and then we realize he's come up with this plan, which is he challenges Bo to a drag race and bets him $1,000, which of course he doesn't have. And then because he had helped out Archie, the Crispin Glover character earlier, he wants a favor in return, which is using his dad's car. So that's what he was thinking about.
Yeah.
And there's a scene of him testing out the car, and he's driving like Rockford.
Yeah. There's some weird angles in general in a lot of these, like the car chase and race scenes. Just some of the shots inside the car, like these kind of weird close-ups. I don't know. I mean, Rod Amato, he's no Hal Needham. I'll just say that.
Well, and for some reason in the race, almost none of the close-ups were of Michael J. Fox. They just kept showing Anthony Edwards. I'm like,
yeah,
I don't care about him. So then that leads to, because the goons are spying, and that leads to Crystal Bernard and another girl pretending to be punks and seducing Chucky and Archie at the roller rink, and then causing them to wreck the car, which then later leads to JJ helping them make it look like Bob Denver was driving drunk and crashed it.
The punk scene, so it's supposed to be Crystal Bernard and Dana Plato, right?
Is it Dana Plato?
Okay.
I thought it was just there was some other girl.
Okay, yeah. There was something later that sort of implied that it was Dana Plato's, that we were supposed to think it was Dana Plato's character, but it wasn't Dana Plato, and they just made it seem like it was just some random person that Crystal Bernard paid off. There was some confusion about that, but I just wanted to make sure that I had that right.
Okay.
It's such an important scene,
Yeah, I mean, it is for the plot.
Yeah, well, and it does
mechanics of all this.
It does get roller disco into the movie, so.
Yeah, can't complain about that.
No, I certainly won't.
Especially in a movie that keeps using 50s style music.
Yeah, what's up with that? There's all these doo-wop musical cues throughout the movie, which is it's not a period piece. It's set in 1983, clearly.
Right. It made the the theme song is sort of 50s or early 60s style too. And so I was it's playing during the credits, which are sort of a montage, and it took me a while to be sure that the thing was set in the 80s.
Right.
I guess because there's a slight crossover in fashion, and the music was confusing, and that they used the kind of high school they always use in movies, big 2-story thing with a tower, and I know those schools exist, but how many people go to those schools, really? I mean, it just looked really old-fashioned, but then people are putting on, modern, at the time, sneakers and stuff, so that part's weird, yeah.
Yeah, and I looked on IMDb. I was curious because there are a couple of scenes in the movie where I was wondering if they had pop rock songs at the time, but maybe just replace them with more generic music, because it sounds like that, but I don't think that. I think it just was that generic.
Yeah, I think so.
Because at least in the IMDb thing, the only music they credited are a couple of Stars and Stripes Forever and some older songs, and they don't even have a credit for the theme song. So
the highly disappointing theme song.
Yeah, although there's something about like the opening line about, you might think I'm telling you lies, but I'm going out to buy school supplies. I mean, I enjoyed that. I kind of want to hear the song again to get some more of the lyrics, but it didn't quite. It's not like Rock and Roll High School where it kind of gets you going, or some other seminal high school theme songs. But yeah, it was a little disappointing.
As far as the story, then, since they were they total this car, so then JJ he motivates Otto and the other misfits who were all in the auto shop class to help him make his car able to compete against Beau's Porsche, which leads them to putting a bus engine in a car, which is pretty absurd.
Yeah, and Bandini, the wacky character, he somehow just gets a bus.
Right, he steals a bus and then picks up passengers, including Miss D'Angelo, and then wrecks the bus into this service station where they're working on it, on the car. And she gives them attempts to give them a pep talk, because she hates the preps as much as they do.
Yeah, she actually does a little cheer routine, I think.
Yeah, I find that it's a little unethical, frankly. I'm sure the teachers did hate the preps quite often, but they can't let the other students know that.
Well, not only that, but she's condoning the commandeering of a public bus, and there seems to be a general acceptance of this illegal drag race. It's incredibly dangerous activity.
Right.
That, half the school's involved in.
Yeah, and all the teachers know about it. It doesn't Tony Dow later, doesn't he say, I hate drag racing, but way to go, man.
Yeah. Yeah, but I guess in a way it's a good counterbalance to the large amount of staff kissing up to Beau Middleton and his prep force.
Right. Prep Force. I like that. It wasn't it the sequel to Mega Force?
Yeah, prep force.
Barry Bostwick would be equally good in that.
He sure would. He had the headband in Mega Force, and the headband would go in pretty well with the early 80s fashions in this movie, I think.
Yeah, Beau Middleton had like a sort of like a racing scarf.
Yeah, yes, he did.
Go along with his popped collars.
And it was his buffalo skin driving gloves that he brags about getting before the race.
Yes, I of course flashed back to murder gloves.
Yeah.
When you mentioned that.
Right.
This might be going a different way.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I hadn't thought about that.
Before they have the race, it seems like Otto has to sacrifice Robot for the cause to use his heat shield on this engine because it's a little much for that car. But then later, Robot's back.
Well, I think that was actually a good scene, and one of the reasons I respect Todd Bridges' performance in this, because I really felt that there was, a connection with him and the robot, and I think it was one of the stronger connections in the movie. Probably the best relationship in High School USA was Otto and the robot. So that was a very touching moment, I think, in the robot, being willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for the team, for the greater good.
And potentially, he was sacrificing a little bit of his future. Because if he doesn't have the robot, then what's NASA going to use?
Yes, well, I was thinking of the robot making the ultimate sacrifice.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, you're right. But Otto's making a sacrifice. Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, that was a nice scene by mostly Todd Bridges. But JJ wins, and there doesn't seem to be much. Like I thought, there were still like 10 minutes left or something, and I thought, Beau's gonna make a stink here and everything, but he really didn't. And then one of the other, to me, very odd things was that they're having this fall dance, and of course the prep force is in charge of it, and they're selling tickets for $100.
Yeah.
I don't remember high school dances costing anything. I mean, I didn't go to a lot of them, but I guess prom would. But
Beau apparently has complete creative control over the entire proceedings.
Yeah, and he's doing it, of course, to, as he says, keep the undesirables out.
Yeah, and that was a thing, again, was a little bit unrealistic, but it did have the purpose of creating the divide, and the money was important because, JJ uses that money to distribute to the misfits so that they can afford to buy, tickets to the dance. They can all go.
Yeah, and rent tuxedos, yeah. And then you go, and he's go to the dance. Beau's still walking around like he's the king of the hill, but like everyone, this win has given everyone confidence. So like, Peggy and Nadine tell off Dana Plato's character, and the teachers seem more confident, and Mr. Plaza finally realizes he was being an idiot, and he wants to be public about his relationship that had sort of ended, but he wants to make a commitment there. And that's all nice. And then I loved, like, Michael J. Fox, JJ enters the dance, and people start cheering, and just Michael J. Fox, the way he responds, like he responds like a star being bashful all of a sudden, like, oh, come on,
Yeah.
Not like a high school kid, like.
Yeah, he's like, the last thing we need is a new king. The king is gone. We don't need a new one.
It's time for democracy, I guess, is the point. So all these things, like I said, I mean, before, like, it seemed like all the stuff with Crispin Glover, like, that stuff didn't feel connected at all until the car got involved, and then like, oh, okay, this was going somewhere, and even So the girls finally get their butt picture because Otto shows up with Robot, and Robot's voice activated, and Beau says something to robot that the robot interprets as a command. What is he? Do you remember?
Yeah, he's like, somebody says something, points out the existence of the robot, and he's like, robot, my behind.
That's right, yeah. And the robot pantses.
Yeah.
And they cut away, but his implication is that his underwear ripped too. So they finally get their picture. And everyone at the whole high school laughs. Poor guy.
Yeah. I've got to give Bo some credit, though, because he does do what he says a lot. He apparently pays off camera. He pays the bet. I was thinking that maybe he would Welsh on it, but he does not. He's a jerk, but I don't know. Maybe he learns his lesson here. But he pretty much says what he's going to do. He's straightforward. You know where you stand with him most of the time. Even though he does some underhanded things, but it can't be a surprise to anybody.
Like everybody knows he's a jerk.
Except somehow it's a surprise to Beth. She needs Crystal Bernard's character to spell out, the punk girl subterfuge, for her to finally turn on him.
Yeah, I mean, she was getting there, but we only mostly get that from looks, reactions she has to other things. Or that, the time she kisses JJ on the mouth right before the race.
Yeah.
That might be a sign that she's changing her mind.
Yes.
I don't know. I'm no body language expert, but it seems like something. So that's the thing in a nutshell. But are there particular scenes or anything that stood out to you?
Well, one scene I really liked was just a simple scene of JJ kind of goofing around talking to Otto because he's playing Nerf Foop, the Nerf basketball hoop, which is one of my favorite toys as a kid. And I enjoyed that little piece of 1980s toy culture. That was pretty good. Not really essential to the plot now that I think about it, but I enjoyed seeing it.
It's a good business. I mean, something for them to do while they're having that scene.
Yeah, and of course we know that Michael J. Fox thrives on having, some business to do while he's reciting dialogue.
Yeah. I enjoyed all the scenes he had with Tony Dow.
Yeah, Tony Dow's a really likable guy too in this.
Yeah.
I mean, he gives him detentions, but he clearly, understands him and has a affection for him, but he's got to do his job at the same time. But he strikes a pretty good compromise between what he has to do and not being a total ogre about it, I guess.
The other thing I thought I had about Michael J. Fox, and I don't claim this as an original thought, but he's really good when he's playing the underdog. Yeah. Like this almost feels like, not just because of Chris McGlover, like a dry run for Marty McFly.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think he actually improves quite a bit in a short period of time. If you watch like Back to the Future right after this, but this is like the genesis of that kind of character, I think. But he's a little raw, in this movie. Still, he's very enjoyable and good to watch. And yes, that kind of underdog appeal does work for him in this one for sure. Although I think he's much better in Back to the Future. But
who's fully formed? Chris McGlover.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few just lines, just the way he says stuff. He doesn't disappoint. I mean, he says weird things and he says them in a weird way. Like, there's one I remember where, somebody asks, he gets off the phone with his dad, and somebody, unbelieving says, "Is your dad drunk?" And he just goes, "Very much so."
Yeah. Should mention, too, that those Chucky and Archie finally get some girls at the dance. Girls who had dramatically rejected them before.
Yeah.
And there's one, he's got some confidence, and once they realize the girls are into them, he's like, "Follow me." And so he walks with one of the girls, and Chucky just walks by himself, and he's like, "Bring the girl."
Yeah. Yeah, that was funny.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, like, some of the big like the climactic race scene is a little disappointing. I mean, it does what it needs to do, but there could have been a little bit more, even, on a TV movie budget. Like, I think there was one, insert for comic effect has a guy, the Clyde character, I guess, falling out of a tree, There just wasn't too much for it. That was a little disappointing if you're building up to a big drag race. And there's a few underhanded things that Bo does, but overall, that kind of disappointed. Again, credit to Rod Amato, but, I have to wonder, what would the great Rod Holcomb have done with that scene? The man who, of course, directed Captain America with Fred Brown. If only he would have had a chance to do something with that. But, I like, what does stand out to me are, some of the things I mentioned earlier. I like that there's a scene at the arcade. I like seeing, more or less, this is kind of what an arcade might have been like, or was like in 1983. And, things that were important to kids. I liked, glimpses of that. I did like early on, Bo throws, a kind of a fancy party at his house. And there's an elaborate cake, which I guess is a cake replica of Excelsior High School.
Yeah.
And right when you see the cake, you hope that somebody winds up in it. I was thinking that Michael Zorik's character would come in crashing in and belly flop into it. But in fact, it was, Bo that wound up face planting into the cake, which was still satisfying.
Yeah. I feel like Michael Zorik is somehow involved in that. The chain reaction.
Yes. Well, right off the bat, when because Michael Zorich and or Chucky and Arch
Yes.
get into the party posing as waiters. They steal like costumes, and before they even get anywhere near the cake, before they even leave like the kitchen, Zorich like falls over, trips, and like crashes into stuff and knocks over a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, and then the preppy goons they're bullying Chucky and Archie, and JJ gets involved, and that's when one of them takes a swing and JJ ducks and hits another preppy, falls into Bo, falls into the cake, and Chucky does cause a lot of problems. And you know what I enjoyed? JJ gave his big speech about teamwork, and everyone was sort of, And then Chucky got up and he added to the speech by talking about what a loser he was.
Yeah.
And he wanted to feel like part of something. And that was good. And then JJ says, thank you. It's really moving. Now get out of here.
Yeah, and then he kind of smiles, and gives him a playful like tap on the cheek, like Frank Sinatra would, or something like that.
Yeah.
So we know it's all good. Yeah, that was a good moment, and overall, this really isn't at all dissimilar from a lot of the teen movies of this era. It has like the similar structure with the multiple characters and the almost anecdotal or vignette style to a lot of the movie. Some of the themes. To me, you can sit and kind of enjoy it on one level. It's just, okay, this is just like a goofy TV movie with a lot of recognizable faces. For me, I also found it interesting just to watch them try to take that R-rated sensibility and turn it into a PG movie. Even from, like, one of the beginning scenes has Mr. P, Dwayne Hickman character.
Mr. Plaza, yeah.
Yes, he's teaching reproduction of plants, which right off the bat, you kind of, it's something that's going to inspire like snickering, and they don't really go too far with it, with the innuendo. Again, it's kind of like getting that subject in a very mild way, but sort of pushing it a little bit and just in a tame way getting there. And then, the obsession with, getting the photograph of the butt. And I think you have like several scenes, like, I don't think we mentioned the scene where Kathy Silvers and Laurie Handler drill a hole in the janitor's closet, which I guess leads into the boys' locker room. And, again, it's sort of interesting to have the girls doing this in a movie for a change. But, well, I meant that as a conjunction. Eventually, Chucky's butt, clad in boxers, winds up plugging, filling the hole.
And crashing through it, yeah.
Yes, crashing through it, so his butt is sticking out of, that hole. So that's, again, a PG-rated version of a scene you might see in something like Porky's.
You know what I enjoyed most about that scene?
What's that?
Is that they drilled the hole with like an old-time hand crank drill.
Right. Well, I guess maybe in their home ec class, that's all they had access to, despite the shop class on the other side of the school being anything goes as far as like parts, right. Access. But yeah, that was a funny bit. And yes, the janitor's closet seems to not be doing it justice, but the janitor's lair is quite a space on its own.
I also enjoyed in that scene, they want access to it without the janitor in there. And he's like, oh, no one's allowed in here. And I'm only like 2 years away from my pension. I don't really want to get in. Like, we'll give you $2. Okay.
Yeah. Lock up when you're done.
Yeah. He must be making a lot of money doing that.
Yeah.
Mr. Plaza and Miss D'Angelo, who always refer to themselves that way, each other that way, are also spending some time there, some alone time.
Yeah, and that's pretty bizarre, too.
Yeah.
For many reasons.
On his bed.
Yeah. I guess, we should probably mention that the Dirty Kurt character is actually played by the man who would go on to play Uncle Rico in Napoleon Dynamite years later.
Awesome.
That was interesting, and I'm not sure how old he was then, but, he does physically look older than everybody else.
Yes, he does.
So that was good. And there's, like a gag at the end involving that, which is good. I mean, say this about High School USA. It plants a lot of seeds that germinate by the end of the movie.
Yeah. I don't know if they leave anything hanging.
Yeah, I've criticized a lot of elements of it, but they put effort into. I mean, some things, it's a TV movie, and they didn't take it too seriously, but they did make effort to put things in there and have them pay off and create a certain narrative, and in some ways they did succeed.
Yeah, I felt like despite what it is, that it felt more like they were trying to tell a story than some of the other movies that were on our poll might, where the ones I've seen tend to feel a little bit like everyone just having fun overdoing it.
Right.
Especially the adults. Like, oh, I can just be wacky. Almost like a sort of like a bad Airplane style movie.
Mm-hmm.
Or bad sketch comedy or something.
Yeah.
This didn't feel like that too much.
No.
Because of that, ultimately it had that cohesiveness of a kind That it didn't feel like just, here's a random weirdo, here's a random weirdo, you know.
Its heart is in the right place. I do think it looks cheap in some ways, just like the font of the credits,
Sure.
and things like that make it look. And just the fact that like I watched it on Tubi streaming, but it's everywhere, and it's got a Multicom Entertainment logo at the beginning. I associate that with stuff that's everywhere because it's kind of cheap. Even though. Nothing against Multicom Entertainment, but their product tends to be everywhere, I guess, licensed out to all parties who will take it. But
then I'm all for them, right? They're the people that brought us Tucker's Witch, so
yeah,
yeah. If they're willing to put it everywhere,
yeah,
we gotta encourage people like that.
Yeah, I mean it's good, but there is a certain sort of lower rent air about this, and ultimately it is like a kind of an attempt to recreate, like we said, like R-rated comedies on the cheap, with a TV movie sensibility. I think it works in the sense that it's to me it's interesting to see how they did that. It's cool to see all these like cameos and all the faces. As an actual comedy, though, that's maybe some of the weakest part. But there are parts that are actually funny that I did enjoy, and I did enjoy some of the characters. As far as like the central relationship, I didn't really care for that, but I did enjoy seeing most of these performers, and overall it's a fun movie. I'd recommend it to anybody that if it sounds interesting, it's going to be interesting to you. Yeah. If you're into this kind of thing, you'll like this.
Right. What was the guy said about Boppo? If you enjoyed the titles of these sketches, then you'll probably.
Oh yeah. If like Arnold Tahoe.
Yes.
If that sounds. Well, I guess what another thing I would say is I think we're giving people a pretty good idea of exactly what to expect in High School USA if you haven't seen it. I don't think you can't go into it thinking that we didn't explain what the movie's about.
Yes, and I don't think you would go into it thinking Michael J. Fox wouldn't get the girl. So I mean we've left a lot for you to find, but I feel like in this case we haven't really spoiled that much, unlike usual.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's worth a look for sure. And I watched it on Freebie, formerly IMDb. You said it's on Tubi, elsewhere, I guess. Worth a look.
I think so. And big thanks to everybody who participated in the Viewer's Choice poll this season and helping us decide which TV movie to talk about.
Yeah. And speaking of our Facebook group, actually this is our Facebook page, but one of our listeners had some things to say about our Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends episode that he said we could share.
Ah, yes.
So this is from Charlie Johnson, and he said, first of all, a big shout out to friend of the show, James, and his daughter, Lucille, for their great request, and he and his son had bonded over Marvel shows, and now that his son is 31, he's Charlie's go-to Marvel source, and Charlie says, here's to many years of enjoyment with your daughter, as to John. And about the episode, first let me say I agree on the resentment comment. There's nothing I look forward to more in the MCU than a Spidey and Human Torch team-up. Second thought is, why does Thunderbird get so disrespected by Marvel cartoons? He mentions that, remember how he was on the villain side of the 90s X-Men opening, which is true. You can kind of see him running around there. And third, the issues with Cyclops' optic beam bugs me a little bit. He's my favorite X-Man too. And last thing, if you notice, the background music on both Spider-Man 81 and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends is the same. Still sticks in my head. And thanks for a great episode.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. And boy, we sure did mention the background music. And I don't know if we really got into that on the podcast, but I think I mentioned it in the show notes afterwards. But yeah, it had that distinctive and highly repetitive background music, which I've really grown to like.
I didn't realize it was the same as the syndicated cartoon, but that doesn't surprise me at all.
No, I'd like to get some ringtones of some of that. Like there was one I called like the Danger theme from Spider-Man and the Peppy theme from Spider-Man. So yeah, maybe I should get some ringtones of those. But yeah, and Charlie knows his X-Men for sure. But I'm glad we happened to pick that episode and that he got a kick out of it.
Mm-hmm. And you can leave fun comments like that at our Facebook page or in our Facebook group if you want. Or you could email them to mailbag@battleofthenetworkshows.com.
Yes, and remember, if you go to battleofthenetworkshows.com, you can find the show notes that I've referenced multiple times today. Easy links to our video playlists, which you can also get on our official YouTube channel. And throughout the week as well, we have other posts and content related to not just these specific episodes, but also just TV in general from the 1970s and 1980s.
And there's also a link to our TeePublic store. If you feel like supporting the show a little bit, you can go follow that link and buy yourself a t-shirt or something.
That's right. And speaking of robots, I happen to have a Rewind Stubbs t-shirt. He is, of course, our official mascot, and he does have a name, thanks to our friend of the show, Amy. So yeah, I'm feeling good about wearing some Rewind Stubbs right now.
Yeah, I gotta say, he was here while I was watching. I could definitely tell he was mostly focused on Robot.
Well, I can't blame him for that.
Robot and Michael Zorg.
Yeah.
Seemed to be his main attention.
Well, we might be developing our robot demographic pretty well this season, too.
Yeah. We've wanted to for a while.
Yeah.
We've been talking about that. Because, what demographic is more evergreen than robots?
That's right.
Okay. Well, we'll be back with more next week.
This episode brought to you by Girardi's Catering. Lumpy is our middle name. This episode also brought to you by Excelsior High School, sticking it to prep since 1983. This episode also brought to you by USA, USA, USA. Join us next time for another exciting episode of Battle of the Network Shows. Learn more, leave feedback, and suggest future episodes at battleofthenetworkshows.com. Follow us on Twitter at BatNetShows, and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Battle of the Network Shows.